Hi, and welcome to the Luminaries In and Out of Sect podcast, a show about the moon and how astrologers embody and relate to it. My name is SP Hall, and I'm your host. Today we are doing something a little bit different. So this is the second episode of a mini-series entitled What Makes an Astrologer, which came about as a result of the comments that Rob Hand made on a recent Astrology Podcast episode about significations in the birth chart of a professional astrologer. The link to this episode is in the show notes. Therein, Rob Hand makes a bit of an offhand comment saying, "The 11th sign from the lot of fortune is a place of acquisition. People," and here he's referring to Project Hindsight, "started looking at their charts, and an awful lot of people had one of the following things true. The lot of fortune was in a sign ruled by Mercury, or Mercury was in the sign of the lot of fortune, or those same two conditions applied to the place of acquisition, which is the 11th sign from the lot of fortune. And to this day, if I don't find that in a person's chart, I wonder about their credentials as an astrologer. This is for making money by astrology, by the way. It's not for studying it. All you need to study astrology is a good, solid Mercury." In the wake of this episode, there was some commentary about this quote on social media. Being curious about what Hand said myself, I put out a tweet thread looking at these conditions in 5 professional astrologers' charts. And in one way or another, all 5 of these people met Hand's criteria. I've put a link to that tweet thread in the show notes for your reference. In response to that, Michelle, who is Astrospection on Twitter, shared a database of famous astrologers from astroseek.com with me and encouraged me to do more research into this subject. I was reticent, but Mo, who is Astral Tour on Twitter, told me that she'd help me carry out a research project looking at Hand's criteria in famous and or professional astrologers' charts. Mo and I ended up looking at about 90 charts of historical famous astrologers and received input from about 40 contemporary professional astrologers through a Google form survey. In this series, I will speak with 5 astrologers and thinkers, Cameron Allen, Daniel Norman, Amy Green, Dorje, and Ali A. Olomi, about their thoughts on Rob Hand's comments and other significations they identify in the birth chart that may point to remuneration from astrology. The series will culminate in a conversation between Mo and I where we will discuss our research and the conclusions that we've drawn from it. In addition, I plan to release an article on my website after the series airs where I summarize our findings and the thoughts of my guests in this series. Please be sure to subscribe to my website for updates, which is linked in the show notes below. Now for my second conversation of this series with the thoughtful, gracious astrologer, Daniel Norman. I think we went quite deep for the amount of time that we spoke. I do want to warn listeners that there is some profanity in this episode, so please proceed accordingly. I also want to say that in this episode, we talk quite a bit about the nature of suffering as it relates to life, which I know can be a challenging topic for some. I want to elaborate here on what I said in my conversation with Daniel. Therein, I say that suffering can be good, and I want to reiterate, as I do in the episode, that that's an oversimplification. What I meant by that is that I've been, perhaps, fortunate to be able to make meaning and find purpose as a result of some of the challenging things that have happened in my life. But I don't necessarily think that suffering is a good thing, or that anyone is required to find meaning in the painful things that have happened in their lives. I hope that makes sense. And I want to thank Daniel again for having that conversation with me in real time because I think it was an important thing for me to explore. In addition to talking about that, we also discussed the 9th house, especially as it relates to the sun and the sun's joy. And we talk about the mystery of fate, or destiny, or our life path, for lack of a better term. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please be sure to check out the links to Daniel's website and socials below, as well as links to some of the references that we touch on in our conversation. Daniel Norman, thank you so much for being with me today. It's great to meet you in person, and thank you for coming and sharing your thoughts.
Thank you very much for having me. It is an honor and a pleasure.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Do you want to start by giving just an introduction to yourself and your astrology practice?
Sure. My name is Daniel Norman, and I'm an astrologer. My practice is called Ever Happening Astrology, and Yeah, I try to help people to hmm, find themselves kind of grounded in the context that they find themselves. And I think that astrology is a good way to do that I found and I like to share with people.
Wonderful. And you've been practicing professionally for a few years, you said?
Yeah, 3 years, something like that, 3 or 4 years, somewhere around there.
Awesome. Wonderful. Yeah, and I was just curious to hear your thoughts on this Rob Hand comment. So his assertion that for someone to practice astrology professionally, or if they didn't have this in their chart, he would kind of look askance at them of
Mm,
Mercury ruling the lot of fortune, being co-present with the lot of fortune, or the place of accomplishment, which is 11th from the lot of fortune,
mm.
having one of those conditions as well. And what was your take upon hearing that?
I mean, I thought it was interesting, and I think I I was mostly so excited to hear from Rob Hand. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? This mythical creature, but he's like one of our venerable elders. So it was really exciting to hear him talk about all of those things. And I think whenever you come across those any of those delineations, especially from the ancient texts, like there's only so much there for everything. And we are all kind of tasked with figuring out what that means so that we can apply it more broadly. Like there's nothing in any text that's like, it's this, and if it's not this, then it doesn't exist. Everything
Mm-hmm.
exists in this place of like gradations and mitigations and blah 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 blah. And that's the whole thing of it. So, when everyone started talking about it, I thought it was like a lot of fun. You
Mm-hmm.
can look, be like, oh, neat. But then I also felt bad because then there are people that were like, well, wait a minute, my chart doesn't say that. I am I not an astrologer? And this kind of identity crisis that plagues even astrologers.
Mm-hmm.
We should know better, right?
Right. Yeah. And so I feel like, yeah, that could be something. And just to be like kind of transparent
Mm-hmm.
with the research, like I have the lot of fortune very closely conjunct Mercury. And so like I kind of qualify. And I was even talking to my partner about it. And she was like, oh, that's so awesome that like you have like kind of found your thing and like you've gotten confirmation from Rob Hand. And I'm just kind of like, yeah, but what about all the people who don't? And if I've been studying astrology pretty intensely for like about the last year, a little bit less than a year, and have had a pretty accelerated kind of learning process, people have told me. But it's like, if I was on that path and then I heard this comment and I didn't have that, and like, would that derail me? Could that derail someone else? Is that, it's an opportunity for some people to be like, fuck you. Like, I'm going to do it no matter what you say. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, I don't have that fuck you. I'm going to do it. And
Right.
which could be awesome. And then it also could be the opportunity from some other people who like, maybe this isn't meant for them. And they hear
Yeah.
this and they're like, oh, maybe I can let this go. And I've heard
Yeah.
people share that too.
I saw a couple of people say that as well, and I think that is. I mean, I think that's really helpful. Honestly, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, if that, if you're in that place of, I mean, because that's another thing that happens, right? Like, I don't know. I was an actor for a long time,
Mm-hmm.
and I think the challenge of being an actor in a place like Los Angeles or New York or something like this is that you want to be realistic, but you also don't want to give up. You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? And there can be it's a really hard place that a lot of people find themselves in of this thing isn't necessarily working for me and I don't even really like it anymore, but I'm not gonna pack up my bags and go home and say like
Right.
I failed. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
And so maybe it can be helpful to have something outside of yourself that can say, hey, it's all right, maybe this isn't the thing that you're necessarily meant to be doing, and it points to there is something else that you are meant to be doing, perhaps.
Right.
um at the same time, yeah, I feel like a thing that comes up in consultation a lot is people will say things like, well, I really want to do this, is it in my chart? And I think my approach to that is always to say, if that's what you want to do, go for it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that the chart says that you can or can't do anything. I think, it certainly says what you might have, greater felicity with or more of a predilection for. You might be more well suited to other things, but I don't think that it says that you can't do anything. If anything, I think it says something about how you are going to express the thing that you're doing. And as much as I like the mercurial associations with astrology, which totally makes sense, I think that if divination lives in the ninth house, and the ninth house is the joy of the sun, come on now, people. We gotta. It's about the vision and the science, and I think I think that what people might be finding is a little bit more of how their chart speaks to their practice of astrology more than whether or not their chart says that they do or don't. I mean, the bound ruler of my lot of fortune is Jupiter, and
the prophet, the teacher, the guru.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And I have Mercury in Leo. It's in the 10th house. It's on the angle, I've got a strong Mercury, and I would not be surprised if in doing all this research, you find a lot of people with a lot of strong Mercury placements. But yeah, in terms of like this particular formula, like I don't really fit it, but I'm very confident that this is the work that I'm meant to be doing in this season of my life. I think that's another thing about coming to it a bit older. I didn't start really even learning astrology in a deep way until I was 36 years old. I've done other things and so there's also I think that's helped me is I have a sense of the other things I've done and how my chart also speaks to those things, and then without thinking about the astrology at all, how my past experiences have contributed to my practice of astrology.
Absolutely.
It's
I
all
can relate a lot to that.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Yeah, one of the things that I think, we're getting a little off script here, but one of the things I think is really interesting and potentially dangerous about astrology is that it comes down to this like study of fate or free will, like the question of fate or free will. Okay. And then am I going to be able to articulate this? Because I'm like feeling it fall away. There's something that can be good about suffering. And I know in my own life, the suffering that I've experienced has helped inform the person that I am. And I wouldn't be some of the good things I am if I didn't have those experiences. In addition, like as you kind of talked about and I relate to, some of these kind of ventures off the main path into different adventures can really inform the rest of our lives, inform how we do astrology, inform how we look at the world and all these things. And just because we do something for a short period of time, that can be that we can see that in the astrology. If something is, a Time Lord is showing up in a certain way, we can see, okay, I was doing this during this time and that tracks with the astrology. But I think it can be difficult to like be so knowledgeable about the astrology that you try to avoid things that might ultimately be good for you, but that you might not choose to experience because you see it in a certain way from your judgment.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think even more than suffering being good is that it happens. Like it's just how it works, it's how everything works. There are good times and there are bad times and there are in between and all of that. And there's nothing that you can't avoid. You can't avoid the difficulty. And I think that one thing that I really appreciate about astrology is that it speaks to those times when you go through it and it's just really shitty. And you can talk about that and you can acknowledge that and you can I don't know, start to develop some kind of relationship with that and also just to sort of be like, oh, okay, well, this is going to lighten up also. It's going to last forever. But just this thing of like everybody has Saturn. Everyone has some less than stellar placements, and the clock is turning and spinning for everybody. And no matter how much you try to plan for it, especially if you're an astrologer. I mean, how many stories do we all tell about the time that you were certain that it was going to be one thing, and then it turned out to be this completely other thing that was actually really obvious the whole time, but you totally missed it. You know what I mean? Like, there's no, at the end of the day, we're still diviners, you know?
I like the way that you frame it. Not necessarily that suffering is good. I think that that's a false oversimplification, but like my experience, and again, maybe this is like exalted Jupiter in the 8th ruling my ascendant. Like I find that if I choose to, I can find meaning in some of the more difficult things that happen.
That's beautiful. That's what's hard. That's what's hard. That's what's hard.
Oh yeah.
I think that's very fortunate to be able to find meaning in those places. And I like the notion of necessity. I like the thing of like, it might not be like you said, it might not be, suffering is not good, but it is, and it does happen, but it is also necessary, because there is a certain thing of, this had to happen for these other things to happen. Everything flows from everything else. And so you don't get the good without the bad. And I think we all have experiences of, well, this is the worst thing that ever happened to me, but it led me to this other great, or not. Like sometimes
shit just happens,
Sometimes it happens, and sometimes it's just like shitty for no reason. And that is also what it's like.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think to go back to this conversation, it's like, just because an astrologer is maybe doesn't have one of these conditions, is working now and making money, doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean that they're in the wrong place. They might be in the perfect place for where they're at in their lives.
Yeah. And I think that we would all do well to not let these delineations, none of this stuff is written in stone, and yeah, like you said, like, what does it mean that you do or don't have these conditions in your chart, is probably a more interesting question than, am I supposed to be doing this or not?
Right. Absolutely. Any concluding thoughts?
No, keep studying, everybody. Get out there, go do it. Don't let anybody tell you that you can't do whatever it is that you want to do.
Love it. Awesome. To support the show by donating or becoming a member, please visit my website, which is linked in the show notes. And please subscribe to the show wherever you listen. You can also find me on Instagram and Twitter. See those links in the show notes as well. If you have any questions or feedback on the show, please feel free to contact me via my website or email me at sphallhorary@gmail.com. In the show notes, you can also find links to astrologers and resources that we touched on in this episode. Thanks. See you next time.